As we begin this journey of understanding how God shapes and molds our lives, it is important to grasp a fundamental truth that God's hands are continually at work in our lives, molding us into the people He has created us to be. In the book of Isaiah we read, "But now, O Lord, you are our Father. We are the clay, and you are our potter. We are all the work of your hand," Isaiah 64. Wait, this powerful image of God as the potter and us as the clay reminds us that we are not random, nor are we the result of chance. Our lives have been intricately designed by the Creator, and He is actively involved in shaping our character, our future, and our purpose. I often reflect on the times in my life when I felt as if I were wandering, unsure of what lay ahead. Perhaps you've experienced moments like these, times when the path seemed unclear, when the obstacles felt insurmountable, or when it seemed as if God was distant. But in those very moments, the truth remains that God's hands were still working. Though we may not always understand the process, we can trust that He is at work, shaping us with the wisdom of the Creator. His timing, His methods, and His purposes are always perfect. Have you ever seen a potter at work? The potter takes a lump of clay, seemingly formless and without shape, and begins to mold it with skilled hands. The clay at first has no idea of what it will become. It may seem rough and unrefined in the beginning, but as the potter works, the shape begins to emerge. With every turn of the wheel, with every press of the hand, the potter brings out the design. The potter brings out the design that was in his mind from the very beginning. The process is not quick. It is not always smooth. Sometimes the potter must apply more pressure. Sometimes the clay must be softened. And at other times, parts of the clay must be reworked to refine the shape. In much the same way, God is shaping us. There are moments in our lives when we may feel like we are in the hands of the potter, spinning on the wheel of life, and we wonder, what's happening to me? Why does it seem like I'm being stretched and pressed? But God's purpose is always clear. He is not simply shaping us to look good on the outside. He is molding our hearts, our spirits, our character, and our future. He is preparing us for the purposes He has designed for us. In my own life, I have seen God's hand at work in ways I never anticipated. Looking back, I see how every experience, whether joyful or painful, has played a role in shaping who I am today. When I faced struggles, I didn't always see the purpose. But as I look back, I now see how God was molding my character, teaching me patience, trust, and endurance. Every season of my life, every triumph was part of the process of shaping me for something greater. God was never absent in those moments. Even when I couldn't see His hand, He was shaping my future, preparing me for His calling. You may be in a season of your life right now where you don't fully understand what God is doing. Perhaps you're facing a trial that seems insurmountable, or maybe you're standing at a crossroads, uncertain of the path ahead. But remember this: God is not distant. He is present, and His hands are at work in your life. The challenges you face are not in vain. They are part of the process of shaping you into the person God has designed you to be. And though it may feel uncomfortable or even painful at times, remember that the potter knows what he is doing. His work is always purposeful, always intentional, and always leading you to a place of fulfillment in His plan. When the potter shapes the clay doesn't have control over the process. It must yield to the potter's hands, trusting that the potter knows what is best. lies we must yield to God's hands in our lives. We must trust that He knows what is best, even when we don't understand the process. And just as the potter doesn't abandon his work until it is finished, God will never abandon His work in us. He is committed to shaping us into the image of Christ, and that is a work He will continue to do until we stand before Him, perfected and complete. So, wherever you find yourself today, whether in a time of joy or a time of trial, trust that God's hands are molding you. Trust that He is at work, shaping your future and guiding you toward His purpose. Even when you can't see it, God is working in ways beyond your understanding. He is molding you, refining you, and preparing you for the future He has planned. Let this truth bring you peace today, knowing that the potter is never far from his clay. He is right there with you, shaping your life in ways you may not yet understand, but that are ultimately for your good and His glory. Trust His hands, trust His process, and know that He is making something beautiful out of your life. As we continue to reflect on God's molding hands, let us dive deeper into the significance of waiting in the process of being shaped by the potter. It is often in the moments of waiting, those periods of uncertainty and struggle, that we feel the greatest tension in our lives. It's easy to think that when we're in the midst of waiting, nothing is happening, and we may begin to question whether God has forgotten us. But it is precisely in these moments that God's work in us is most profound. The potter never abandons his work. He is always present, always shaping, even when we can't see the results immediately. I can recall a time in my life when I was waiting on a decision that would significantly alter the course of my future. At that time, I couldn't see how everything would come together. I felt lost and confused, unsure of which direction to take. There were moments of doubt, moments when I felt like I was on a never-ending waiting list with no clear answer in sight. Maybe you've been there, waiting for clarity, for direction, or for something to break through in your own life. Waiting can feel like an eternity. And in that silence, we often wonder, where is God? What is He doing in all of this? But just as the potter is never idle, neither is God. God's hands are constantly at work in our lives, even when we're waiting. You see, the clay doesn't get to control the pace or the direction of the molding process. It is the potter who determines the time and how long the shaping will take. Likewise, we don't control the timing of God's work in our lives, but we can trust that He is never idle. He is working even when we can't see it. He is shaping us, refining us, and preparing us for the purposes He has planned. Waiting may be uncomfortable, but it is often the place where God does His most important work. Just like a piece of clay must be softened, stretched, and kneaded before it becomes something beautiful, so too must we be prepared for what God is calling us to. The waiting process is not a waste. In fact, it is one of the most valuable seasons in our spiritual growth. During the waiting, God is deepening our trust in Him, teaching us patience, and aligning our hearts with His will. It is in the waiting that we learn to surrender, to stop trying to control every outcome, and to simply trust that God's timing is perfect. His ways are higher than our ways, and His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. I often reflect on the stories in the Bible of individuals who experienced long seasons of waiting. Take Joseph, for example. Joseph had dreams as a young man that showed him in a position of power, but his path was anything but straight. He was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and imprisoned for years. And yet, through every trial, Joseph trusted God. Even in his waiting, God was working. God was shaping Joseph, preparing him for a future he couldn't yet understand. And when the time came, when God's purpose was finally revealed, Joseph saw that all of his suffering and waiting had a divine purpose. God's hand was at work, even when Joseph couldn't see it. In Genesis 50:20, Joseph later says to his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done." The saving of many lives. God used the waiting in Joseph's life to prepare him for a role that would save not only his family, but an entire nation. It's often in the waiting that we also begin to discover the depth of God's faithfulness. As we wait, we realize that we can't do it on our own. We need Him. We need His wisdom, His guidance, and His strength. And when the time is right, God will make it clear. But until then, we must rest in His hands, trusting that He is shaping us for what is ahead. God's timing is not like our timing. He sees the beginning, the middle, and the end all at once. We may look at our lives and think, this is taking so long. Why haven't I received the answers I've been praying for? But God sees the big picture. He knows what we need, and He knows the perfect time to reveal it to us. While we wait, God is preparing us, refining us, and aligning everything according to His perfect plan. We must trust that His timing is always right. It may not be on our timetable, but it is always at the right moment. In my own life, I've seen time and time again how God's hand has worked behind the scenes, shaping circumstances, opening doors, and closing others in order to prepare me for the future. He had planned all along. It wasn't always easy, and it wasn't always clear, but in hindsight, I can see that every moment of waiting was part of a much greater purpose. I know that God has worked in your life in similar ways, even if you may not have recognized it at the time. If you're in a season of waiting today, take heart. Know that God's hands are molding you even in this moment. His peace is available to you, and as you trust Him in the waiting, you will experience a peace that surpasses all understanding. God is not idle. He is at work, shaping your future, refining your character, and preparing you for the amazing things He has ahead. So let's trust Him even when the process seems slow. Let's surrender to His hands, knowing that He is molding us into something beautiful. And when the time comes, when God's plan is fully revealed, we will see that every step, every season, every moment of waiting was worth it. Trust the potter's hands today. He is shaping your future, and His work is never in vain. As we continue to explore the truth that God's hands are molding us into the people He wants us to be, I want to take a moment to reflect on something that each of us faces at some point in our journey: the struggle to trust the process. It's one thing to believe that God is at work in our lives, but it's quite another to have the patience to trust that His process is good, especially when it feels slow, uncomfortable, or when we simply don't understand what He's doing. In my own walk with God, there have been many times where I questioned His timing and wondered why things weren't coming together the way I had hoped. But in every season, I've learned that God's timing is always perfect and His process is always purposeful. And beloved, if there's anything I want to remind you of today, it's this: God is not wasting your time. Every moment, every step of the way is part of His great plan for your life. I can't help but think back to the times in my life when I struggled with impatience. I had a vision for my future. I could see the life I wanted, the work I wanted to do. and the person I longed to become. But it seemed like nothing was happening. Opportunities didn't come when I expected them. Doors that I thought were open suddenly closed. I found myself in situations where I felt stuck, just like the clay on the potter's wheel, spinning in circles, unable to see the bigger picture. Maybe you felt this way too. Perhaps you found yourself in a season of waiting, wondering why the pieces of your life aren't falling into place as you expected. In moments like these, we have a choice. We can either try to rush God's timing, or we can trust that He is working behind the scenes to prepare us for something greater. God's timing is often difficult for us to comprehend because it's so different from our own. We live in a world where instant gratification is the norm. We want what we want, and we want it now. But God's ways are not our ways. His understanding is far beyond ours. Isaiah 55:8-9 reminds us of this. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. This means that the way God works in our lives is often beyond our immediate understanding. What may seem like a delay or a setback is often part of a larger divine strategy that is unfolding exactly as it should. In these moments of waiting, we are called to trust. And trusting is not always easy. It requires surrender. It requires letting go of our own timelines, our own desires, and trusting that God, the one who created the heavens and the earth, knows exactly what we need and when we need it. Trusting God's timing means we must believe that He is orchestrating every detail of our lives, and He is doing it in a way that is best for us. He is shaping our character, developing our faith, and preparing us for what is to come when we trust that God is working even when we cannot see the results immediately. We align ourselves with His will, and that is when we begin to experience His peace. Think of the story of Joseph in the Bible. From the outside, his life seemed full of misfortune. He was sold into slavery by his brothers, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. He could have easily questioned God, wondering why his life was filled with so much pain and suffering. Yet, through it all, Joseph trusted God's process. He knew that God had a purpose for his life, even when the circumstances didn't make sense. And in the end, God's timing was perfect. Joseph was elevated to a position of power, second only to Pharaoh, and he was able to save his family and many others from famine. Had Joseph rushed ahead or become bitter during his time in prison, he might have missed the opportunity God had prepared for him. But because he trusted God, the process, and His timing, Joseph fulfilled his purpose in God's grand plan. I believe this same truth applies to us today. God's process in our lives may be difficult to understand, but it is always purposeful. Even in the waiting, He is preparing us for something greater. He is refining us, deepening our faith, and building the strength we will need for the future He is shaping. I've seen this in my own life. I've watched as the trials I've faced have led to growth, and I've experienced firsthand how God used my most challenging moments to bring about His plan. Looking back, I can see that the struggles were not in vain. They were the very things that shaped me into who I am today. And I'm confident that for you too, God's hand is at work, molding and shaping you, even when it doesn't seem like it. But there's something else that I want you to remember today. Trusting God's timing doesn't mean we sit idly by. It means we continue to seek Him, to do the work He has placed in front of us and to walk faithfully in His will. We don't wait passively. We wait expectantly. We wait with the understanding that God is always at work, even when we can't see it, and He is preparing us for what is next. This is where the peace of God surpasses all understanding. When we can trust that God is at work, even in the waiting, we can experience a peace that transcends the uncertainty of the moment. We can walk through the trials of life with confidence, knowing that God is leading us exactly where He wants us to go. And so, I encourage you today, trust in God's timing. Trust that He knows what you need before you even ask. Trust that He is working behind the scenes, orchestrating every detail of your life to bring you to the place where He can use you for His glory. Even in the moments of waiting, trust that His timing will bring clarity. When the time is right, He will reveal His purpose in your life, and you will see how everything has come together perfectly, just as He planned. So take a deep breath, surrender your plans, and trust the potter's hands. He is molding you for something beautiful, and in His time, it will all come together. As we explore further into God's grand plan for our lives, one thing becomes increasingly clear. The journey of trusting in His timing is not just about waiting. It's about surrender. And I know surrender can be a daunting word. For many of us, it conjures up feelings of loss, of giving up control, or perhaps even of stepping into the unknown. But I stand before you today to tell you that surrender is not about losing. It's about gaining something far more precious than what we could ever hold on to on our own. It's about gaining peace, joy, and strength that can only come when we fully yield our plans, our worries, and our desires to the Creator who holds our future in His hands. I've lived long enough to know that life doesn't always unfold the way we expect. We have our dreams, our aspirations, and we work tirelessly toward those goals. But what happens when the path before us seems unclear, when the door won't open, or when everything we've worked for seems to unravel? This is where the heart of surrender comes into play. This is where we learn to trust not just in God's purpose for us, but in His timing, knowing that His timing is always right. Never too early, but always perfect. The act of surrender doesn't come naturally. As humans, we tend to want to control our circumstances, to rush through the waiting, and to force our own plans to unfold. But God, in His infinite wisdom, knows that the most fruitful growth happens when we allow Him to take the reins. It's when we surrender that we make room for His peace to flood our hearts. It's when we stop striving, stop pushing, and stop trying to control the outcome that we can finally hear His voice speaking to us in the stillness. And it is in this stillness that His presence becomes most tangible. Perhaps you've been in a season where you felt completely out of control, a season where the answers to your prayers seem to be delayed, or where the challenges seem insurmountable. I understand how that feels. But I want you to hear me when I say that God is not unaware of your struggles. He sees your pain, your fear, and your longing. And in His perfect timing, He will show you His plans for you. Plans that are far greater than what you could ever imagine. He is working in the unseen, molding you, refining you, and preparing you for what's ahead. Consider the story of Abraham, who, in his old age, was promised a son by God. For years, he and Sarah waited, but there was no sign of the promise being fulfilled. In their impatience, they tried to rush God's timing, But it wasn't until Abraham and Sarah fully surrendered to God's plan that the promise was realized. God did not forget them. He was simply waiting for the perfect moment, the moment that would bring the greatest glory to His name. And when that moment came, Isaac was born and the promise was fulfilled. This is a powerful reminder for us today. God's timing is not about our timeline. It's about His perfect plan. He knows what we need and when we need it. Sometimes the waiting is a process of preparation. It's a time when He is shaping our hearts, teaching us patience, and strengthening our faith. And when we surrender our impatience, we find that His peace floods our souls in ways we never thought possible. The moment we let go of our need to control and trust in God's timing is the moment that His peace surpasses all understanding. Now, I know what you might be thinking, but Pastor, I've been waiting for so long. I've prayed and I've trusted, but the answers still haven't come. I want you to understand that God is never late. He's never forgotten you. He's working in ways that we cannot always see, but rest assured He is faithful. His timing is always right, and in that moment when He answers, you will see that it was worth the wait. There is a divine purpose in the waiting. And as we surrender to His timing, we are prepared to receive His blessings in ways that will glorify Him. As we come to the close of this message, I urge you to reflect on your own life. Is there an area where you're struggling with impatience? Is there something you've been praying for, waiting for, and wondering if God is hearing you? I want to encourage you to surrender it to Him today. Trust in His perfect timing. Know that He is working behind the scenes, even when you cannot see it. He has not forgotten you, and He never will. The waiting is not in vain. It is preparing you for something greater, something more beautiful than you could have ever imagined. Let go of the need to control and allow God to take the reins. As you do, you will find peace that surpasses all understanding. His timing is perfect. His plan is perfect. His plan is perfect. And you are right where He wants you to be. Trust in His timing, and in the waiting, may you find the peace that only comes from knowing that He is in control. Let's pray together today, surrendering all our impatience and trusting in His perfect timing. Would you trust Him with your plans, your prayers, and your future? Trust that God's hands are at work, shaping you, molding you, and preparing you for something far greater than you could ever imagine. And in that trust, may His peace be yours today. As we conclude this message today, I want to remind you that God's peace, the kind that transcends all human understanding, is available to each and every one of us, no matter the circumstances. It's easy, isn't it, to feel overwhelmed by life's challenges, to allow our worries and anxieties to consume us. We live in a world that moves at an overwhelming pace, where we are bombarded by news, social media, deadlines, and the constant noise that fills our days. But here's the good news. In the midst of this chaos, God is offering us His peace, a peace that is not dependent on what's going on around us, but rather on the unchanging nature of God Himself. When we put our trust in Him, we tap into a peace that has the power to calm our hearts and still our minds. This is the kind of peace that Jesus spoke of when He said in John 14:27, "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid." This is the peace that can quiet the storms in your life, that can give you rest in the midst of trials, and that can give you strength when you feel weak. But here's the key. It comes through faith and trust in God's perfect timing. I know that for many of you, there may be areas in your life where you are still waiting for answers. You've been praying, believing, and trusting, yet the fulfillment of God's promises still seems out of reach. Perhaps you've been asking, God, where are you? Why haven't you answered me yet? And it's in these moments of waiting, of not seeing the outcome, that we are tested. But I want to encourage you today. Don't let the waiting define you. Let the waiting strengthen your faith. God is not absent in your waiting. He is right there working behind the scenes, preparing the answers that you need in His perfect timing. His plan for your life is unfolding exactly as it should. Trust in that. Let me ask you, do you believe that God is working even when you can't see it? Do you trust that His timing is always right, even when it feels like the wait is unbearable? Because that is where peace begins, not in the answers you receive, but in the trust that God has a plan for you, a plan that will be fulfilled in His perfect timing. So I invite you today to take a step of faith. Let go of your anxiety, let go of your fears, and let God's peace fill you. If you're struggling, if you feel like the weight of the world is on your shoulders, I want you to know that God is close to you and He's waiting for you to invite Him into your situation. Don't try to carry the weight alone. Surrender it to Him and experience the peace that only He can provide. Let Him lead you through this season of waiting and watching, knowing that He is working things out for your good. As Philippians 4:6-7 reminds us, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. If you're ready to trust in God's timing and let His peace fill your heart today, I want to invite you to take a moment right now to surrender. Surrender your worries, your fears, your desires, and your plans to Him. If you're ready to experience His peace in a way that you never have before, simply say this prayer in your heart: God, I trust you. I trust that you are working in my life even when I don't see it. I surrender my anxieties to you, and I ask for your peace to fill me. I believe that you are in control, and I trust your perfect timing. Know this: God sees you. He hears your prayers. He knows your heart, and He is working on your behalf. Trust in that today. As you step forward in faith, remember that God's peace is available to you right now, no matter what your circumstances may be. So, my dear friend, let go of the weight you've been carrying. Trust that God's timing is perfect, and let His peace guard your heart and mind. His presence is with you today, and His love will never fail you. Take that step of faith and let God's peace reign in your life today.